Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I am joined today. My name is Ken Fenyo, President of Research and Advisory at Coresight Research. I'm joined today by Xavier Facon. He's the Global Head of Retail Media at NielsenIQ. We're going to be talking about retail media, what it's all about, what it takes to really be successful in it. And so I'm really excited for the conversation. Good morning, Xavier.
Good morning.
Thanks very much for joining us. Why don't we kick off and maybe start a bit broad and talk a bit about, love to get your thoughts on how do you define retail media? Is it really just all about search ads with e-commerce, or is it a broader concept?
I think it's broader, right? So it's two main parts. The one part is what retailers have in terms of advertising channels, both on all their digital properties and in their physical store. But then it's also what retailers have in terms of enabling, a more modernized digital advertising using their great data, right? Retailers have some of the best data to build insights and measurement around. So it makes sense that when you activate media using that data, that you call this retail media as well. And most retailers offer that now.
That makes sense. We've seen a lot of growth in the market. I know we've looked at we're talking about, Amazon's building a huge business. We're seeing a lot of retailers really invest in retail media. But in your mind, what's really driving the growth? What's making this emerge as such a big opportunity space?
Honestly, I suspect initially the retailers that saw the opportunity to create revenue from monetizing the eyeballs on their websites and apps, I guess, they saw this as one of the big advantages in terms of getting that alternative revenue. But I do think there's a lot of evolution in that, right? Because when a brand invests in the media business of a retailer to boost their presence at that retailer, what it gives the retailer, which is extremely important, is the awareness in the public that that brand is part of that assortment and that you may be able to go to that store rather than going to two stores to get your full shopping trip done. So at the end of the day, I think for the retailer, they like the idea of having collaboration with their suppliers in order to improve the marketing overall of their store.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the retailers are looking to create more of an experience, but maybe let's pick up on that a bit. If I am a retailer, how should I think about using this? Is it about, how do I fit into my marketing strategies? And, how do I think about it also? Is this really just about getting extra revenue, or what's the real value for me if I'm a retailer looking at this?
I would say, there is already a strong collaboration between the retailer and its suppliers. And when a retailer gets into the mindset of saying, I'm going to include these marketing tactics, this retail media, and maybe also my promotions into that collaboration, what do I need to do to grow and make that successful? And number one issue there is, of course, give the supplier and the various personas that are going to invest in this transparency. Show the opportunities of when that marketing really works best through, deep customer insights, through, other types of, reporting and event collaboration. And ultimately, then that leads to an ROI that actually can't be beat by many other marketing and media channels. And so that is one of the main things that I think that retailers should have in their mindset, is to say, this is a way to collaborate with my suppliers in a positive way.
That's great. And I agree. I think that collaboration is under talked about. I'm not sure if that's actually good English, but I think in a lot of ways, the ability to collaborate around the data is a core driver. I think we've certainly seen in a lot of work we've done. Let me switch gears maybe to the tech for a second. Most retailers are not media people. They've not, they have various capabilities about analyzing their data. What are some of the key things you need from like a technology and a skill set if you're a retailer thinking of getting into retail media or just enhancing what you have? What kind of things do you think what pieces do you really need to make this work?
I like the model that the retail media business is very specific to the retailer in terms of how they create it, right? Because every retailer is different anyway. So my thinking is, if you want, say, just to put a number out there, about $20 million in revenue from this, then you can afford to put 10, 15 people on that actually are kind of product people, innovative people that connect the dots between the assets you have in your unique retail scenario, the real estate you have, the data you have, and then connect that to the right execution platforms. And so you would need an on-site ad server like for sponsored product ads. You would need a DSP for accessing media through the programmatic open web world using your data. You would need a media planning approach. And there, I think connecting that to your customer insights portal and connecting that to self-service media measurement portals, then you're starting to create a business that is really very exciting from the supplier perspective as well. And then you can actually scale your revenue beyond that original number that I mentioned.
Interesting. Actually, let me ask you a question. I was talking to a retailer yesterday who was wondering whether the brands really want self-service, right? Do the brands really want to engage with you in a self-service way, or are they looking for more of a, something more managed? I'm curious what you're seeing in the market.
You have to offer the spectrum because brands approach retail media very differently based on their size and based on, what they're interested in. But in all cases, it's a good policy to at least set up your ad tech stack that self-service is possible. You may need to provide your own, service team on top of it in order to do the hand-holding and maybe even end-to-end all of the execution. But, it's important you build that trust with your suppliers that if they want to go and look at how their campaign is doing, how it's being optimized, what data is being used, how audiences are built to better target and personalize, that they can do that. Because making it a black box feels like, it's going to be a tax, right? The retailer is going to tax the supplier for doing something with them and just trust us. That is not the modernized way of doing digital advertising, which is ultimately what retail media has become. It is a very advanced way of targeting shoppers at the right time, with the right message, with the right incentive, and with the right ROI attached to it. And so transparency, I think, is important there.
Do you see what's missing in the solutions when you look at sort of what retailers are offering and as you think about it also from what the brands need? Is there any big gaps that you're seeing that retailers have in their solutions?
I think, it's similar to where I think this is going, right, as far as how it's evolving now. But, main issue sometimes is that in the media planning, there is not enough leveraging of the data of the retailer. They do leverage it to, target the right shopper based on a purchase history. They may leverage it to measure a closed loop, sales lift. But they will not use it enough to actually find the right opportunities, to find the right audiences, to target based on shopping behavior in a more broader sense. The second thing I think that many retailers have not gotten to is truly looking at this omni-channel, right? So from the perspective of doing it in the store at the right touch points close to the point of conversion, right? I'm thinking digital screens and other in-store tactics. And then zooming out to near store, the signage, on your way to the store, but then also tying that together with what's happening on people's mobile phones and, on their desktops at home to, ultimately their e-commerce site. So all of these different channels, and I can mention much more, right? Social media and so forth, really is showing the ROI as a comprehensive multi-channel or omni-channel approach is, I think, what's still missing and what, retailers are now moving more towards.
Yeah, I'll be interesting too as this gets deployed. I know earlier in my career I was at Kroger and we did a lot of personalized marketing, but the real value is when you looked at the customer behavior over time, right? Not on a campaign basis, right? Because you might send a mailing with some personalized offers and maybe it drove business, maybe it didn't, but definitely if you looked at over a period of time, you really saw a huge difference for the people who got those offers. They really engaged more, shop more, and had a huge impact. So I think you're right. You need to look at it across the channels. Why don't we switch and look at it from the CPG lens for a second, right? They're the ones funding a lot of this. There's, I think in some ways we've seen they're shifting some of their national brand dollars into these retail media vehicles. How if I'm a brand, how am I looking at this? Where does it fit into my plans and strategies, and what benefits am I getting from it? Maybe I don't get from my other media that I invest in.
Yeah, if you're a brand that does not like retail media, it's because you don't know if it works or not. You think you're spending a very fragmented across many different retailers and different points of execution. If you're a brand that does like it, you have gotten to a point where you understand the ROI of it, and you realize that obviously comparing the measurement approaches of media in terms of what they're doing with their brand dollars nationally across everything versus what's happening with the analysis and the ROI of what's happening with the loyalty data that the retailer can bring to bear. There, when they start seeing those differences and they can start seeing those opportunities, they will go and invest dollars from the brand side into the retail media side quite swiftly, right? Because in this day and age, awareness is important, but also ROI is key. And so I feel like CPGs that have found a way at scale to collaborate with those retailers, have the right partnership through joint business planning and so forth, are spending many more budgets. They converge their budget and they putting it in those retail media businesses. But that being said, I would say every brand is still addressing this in a different way. It depends on terms of what category you are and what penetration you have and what kind of your needs are. An interesting tidbit there is that what I'm seeing is that the smaller brands have gained awareness of the opportunity, and they are the ones that are actually seeing the advantage of being able to work with that very granular data and looking for that needle in a haystack opportunity to make the right media investments with the right retailers. And I like to see that evolution where the playing field between the big brands and the smaller ones is kind of improved that way.
That's interesting. Yeah, I guess that makes some sense. It's hard to get your foot in the door if you're a small guy working with a big retailer. And if you get ahead of the curve on some of these new things and are willing to invest, it does allow you to get ahead of the game. I think we saw that a bit in e-commerce or, a number of years ago, that a lot of the brands taking advantage of selling online through marketplaces were tended to be smaller, right? They're the ones willing to take the chance and try the new things. So I think that makes a lot of sense. If I'm from the brand point of view again, what's frustrating of working with retailers is I'm thinking a little bit, brands will sort of will start directing their monies to the retailers where they see that ROI you talked about and probably where it's easy to work with, or they want to work the way it works the way the brands want. So what's kind of missing? Like if you're a brand, what would you want to see different, or how do what's kind of missing from your point of view?
Well, it's still very hard to compare your performance across different retailers, right? And there needs to be more of a standard approach of providing measurements, ROI measurement, return on ad spend. There needs to be more of an understanding, does the incrementality come from this media, from those exposed users, or are there other elements that are driving that performance at the retailer? And so that is what, brands still are clamoring for, that there's, companies that are focusing on solving that fragmentation issue with measurements of media. Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, I don't want to leave the consumer out of it, because they're ultimately the person who's receiving the media and then hopefully buying based on what they're seeing. But when you think about the consumer, what's the value for the consumer from retail media?
I personally think that at the same time as retail media is growing, there's also convergence between retail media and all the different promo approaches. Is it temporary use pricing, or is it digital coupons and all that good stuff? And so when you're amplifying that promo evolution with media, you end up giving the right incentives to the right shoppers, which they really love, right? Because at that point, for the use of their loyalty data, they get a fair exchange in terms of a value coming back to the consumer in terms of lower prices or opportunities to buy the product at a time that they're actually a ready buyer, right? So using that more granular data, you're getting relevancy, but also you're giving back value to that shopper. And I think they love that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and we've seen that through some other research we've done. It's that idea of a value exchange. Consumers are willing to share data, but they need to get value back. They don't want to just feel like it went into a block box and that was all that happened to them. I know we're running a bit short on time. Xavier, maybe before we end, why don't we look ahead? So what are some of the bigger trends you see? Where do you see retail media evolving over the next several years? And, both from the retailer and maybe the brand point of view.
I see retail media as the modernization of digital ads. And I see that happening now on more and more channels. And so what you're starting to see is that the digital screens in store are targetable and are measurable using that loyalty data. You're seeing more channels like social and even TikTok and so forth playing a role in retail media. So that increases the scale. And that increases the amount of eyeballs that can be reached with that limited data that the retailer may have. So the growth really comes from the expansion of channels. And I also, like I mentioned before, I really like the idea of retail media being liked by the shopper through the convergence with various promo capabilities, digital coupons, and so forth. And so I see that as the future. You see more and more big retailers doing now, but I think that's going to go to all retailers and retail media soon. So away from just sponsored product ads, because that is ultimately not always the best user experience, even though that's an immediate opportunity, into more offsite, broader open web, use of the retail media data and drive performance that way. I see that as the solution.
That's great. Well, it looks like we're out of time. Xavier, thank you very much for the conversation today. Really interesting. We continue to believe retail media is going to be a huge part of the business for retailers going forward. So I think it's been really informative. And thanks very much. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Ken. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you.